The strangest thing about that night wasn't the noise we heard in the woods. It wasn't the dreams my friends described the next morning. It was the fact that when I woke up, our entire campsite had been rearranged while we were sleeping, and none of us had any memory of it. To this day, I still can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever moved our tents that night wasn't normal. This happened during spring break in my junior year of college. Back then, my three closest friends and I had a tradition of taking a camping trip together once a year. It started during freshman year when we were all broke and needed cheap ways to get out of the city. The group was small but tight. Kevin was the practical one. He always planned routes, handled maps, and made sure we didn't accidentally get ourselves lost. Ally was the adventurous one. She was always pushing us to go deeper into the woods, hike longer trails, and try places other people ignored. Seb was quiet, but he was the funniest guy in the group once he got comfortable. And then there was me. I guess I was somewhere in the middle. That year, money was especially tight for all of us. So instead of booking a regular campground, we decided to try dispersed camping. If you don't know what that is, it basically means camping on public land where there are no official sites, no bathrooms, and no staff around. Just you and the wilderness. Kevin found a location on one of those camping apps that listed free spots on Forest Service land in Colorado. The place was outside Buena Vista, somewhere down a long dirt road that barely showed up on GPS. It looked remote, which at the time sounded perfect. We reached the area late in the afternoon after a long drive through winding mountain roads. The Forest Service road was rough. Dust kicked up behind the car as we slowly made our way deeper into the trees. Eventually, we found a clearing that looked good enough. There was a dried creek bed cutting through part of the area. It looked like water used to run through there years ago, but now it was just a stretch of cracked earth and scattered rocks. What stood out to me was how quiet the place was. No other campers, no parked vehicles, no fresh tire tracks. It felt like we had the entire forest to ourselves. At the time, we thought that was amazing. Looking back, I think it should have been a warning. We set up our tents in a loose circle about 15 feet apart. Nothing fancy, just 4 tents wherever the ground was flat enough to sleep on. The evening was pretty normal. We started a small fire, drank a few cheap beers we brought along, and played cards while the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The air got colder as the night went on. By around 11, everyone was exhausted from the drive. One by one, we headed into our tents. And that's when things started to get strange. I'm normally a very light sleeper. At home, I wake up several times a night. Any small noise or change in temperature usually does it. Camping usually makes that even worse. Branches cracking, wind hitting the tent, animals moving through the trees. Those sounds always wake me up. But that night, I slept like I had been knocked unconscious. No tossing, no waking up, no strange noises, just darkness. The next thing I knew, sunlight was shining through my tent. I woke up feeling oddly groggy, like my brain was still catching up with my body. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But the second I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong, very wrong. All 4 of our tents had moved. Not just shifted a few inches, they had been physically relocated. Our tents were now arranged in a perfect square formation. Right in the center of that square sat a small stack of rocks that absolutely had not been there the night before. At first, I honestly thought I was still dreaming. I stood there staring at the scene for what felt like an entire minute, trying to process what I was seeing. Each tent had been moved roughly 20 to 30 feet from its original position. But the strangest part? The tent stakes were still perfectly secured in the ground. It looked like someone had carefully picked up each fully assembled tent and placed it somewhere else. While we were sleeping inside, I quickly checked inside my tent. Everything was exactly where I left it. My sleeping bag hadn't shifted. My phone was still plugged into my portable charger. My backpack was untouched. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was missing. That made it even creepier. I called out to my friends. Kevin was the first one to unzip his tent and step outside. The moment he looked around, his face turned pale. I didn't even have to explain anything. He saw it. A few seconds later, Ali and Seb came out too. And just like Kevin, they froze when they noticed the new layout of our campsite. For a moment, none of us said anything. We just stared at each other, trying to figure out if someone was playing a joke, or if we had somehow sleepwalked and done this ourselves. Kevin suggested maybe we had gotten drunk and moved the tents during the night without remembering, but that theory fell apart almost immediately. We found drag marks in the dirt. They showed exactly where each tent had originally been. The marks stretched across the ground toward their new positions. But strangely, each drag mark stopped about 10 feet before the final location of the tent, like something had dragged them most of the way, then lifted them the rest of the distance. The rock pile in the middle was even weirder. There were 4 stones stacked carefully on top of each other, balanced in a way that looked almost deliberate, almost symbolic. Kevin walked over to get a closer look. As he leaned down to examine it, he accidentally bumped the top rock with his hand. The entire stack collapsed instantly. The stones rolled onto the ground with dull thuds. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then we heard it. A deep rumbling noise echoed somewhere in the distance. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. The sound reminded me of huge stones grinding against each other, like the sound of an ancient door slowly being pushed open somewhere underground. All 4 of us heard it at the exact same time, and somehow, without even saying a word, we all understood the same thing. We needed to leave, immediately. There was no discussion, no debate. We just started packing. Tents came down, sleeping bags were stuffed into backpacks, gear was thrown into the car. None of us spoke much during the process, but the energy between us was strange. It felt like we were connected somehow, like we all shared the same fear. Ally eventually mentioned something strange. She said she had a vivid dream during the night. In the dream, she was walking through a wide, empty desert while someone counted her steps out loud. Kevin said he had a dream too. In his dream, he was marching in formation with soldiers like he was part of some military unit. The dream sounded different, but somehow, they felt similar, like they shared the same theme: movement, walking, being guided somewhere. Seb and I didn't remember dreaming at all, but hearing their stories only made the situation feel worse. Because deep down, none of us believed this was coincidence. We packed the car faster than any camping trip I've ever been on. Within 5 minutes, we were driving away from the clearing. No one looked back. No one wanted to. That happened 5 years ago. We never really talked about it afterward. Life moved on. Kevin eventually moved to Denver. Ally went to graduate school in California. Seb moved to Chicago with his girlfriend. We still text occasionally, but that night, it never comes up. Almost like we've all silently agreed to pretend it didn't happen. But sometimes late at night, I still think about that campsite. And I wonder something that still sends chills down my spine. If those stones hadn't been knocked over, would we have stayed longer? And if we had stayed, what would have happened next? If that story gave you chills, make sure you subscribe right now because the next story is even darker. And before we continue, I want to ask you something. What do you think really moved those tents that night? Was it something explainable or something far more disturbing? Let me know your theory down in the comments. I read every single one. I still think about the moment my headlights passed those 3 figures standing in the trees. They weren't hiding. They weren't moving. They were just standing there in the darkness, watching the road. And the worst part is, they were standing in the direction of the campsite we had just left. The same campsite where a man named Aiden was now stranded alone with a slashed tire. To this day, I have no idea what happened to him after we drove away. But sometimes I wonder if that note on my windshield wasn't a warning. It might have been a chance to leave before something terrible happened. This happened last summer when I was 23. My girlfriend, Cadence, and I had been together for about a year and a half. Things weren't bad between us, but we had definitely slipped into that routine phase of a relationship. Work, dinner, Netflix, sleep, repeat. So we decided to do something different. A camping trip. Just the 2 of us. No phones, no social media, no distractions, just a quiet weekend in the woods. At least, that was the plan. After a couple weeks of looking around online, I found a small campground tucked deep inside a national forest in North Carolina. It wasn't one of those big crowded places with RVs and families everywhere. According to the reviews, it only had 6 or 7 campsites total, and they were spaced pretty far apart. That sounded perfect to me. Remote enough to feel private, but not so remote that we'd be completely alone. We left Friday afternoon around 3. The drive took a couple hours, and the closer we got to the forest, the more the scenery changed. Highways turned into narrow back roads. Back roads turned into gravel paths. Eventually, we found the Forest Service road that led to the campground. It was rough, potholes everywhere, loose rocks popping under the tires. But my truck handled it fine. By the time we reached the campground clearing, the sun was already dipping low behind the trees. The place looked exactly like the pictures online. A wide clearing surrounded by tall forest. a few scattered picnic tables, a couple fire rings, and several small campsites tucked back between the trees. Most of them were empty. That was a good sign. As we slowly drove through the area looking for a spot, we passed one campsite that had a blue sedan parked beside it, but there was no one around. Cadence noticed it too. "Guess someone beat us here," she said. I shrugged. Not a big deal. There were plenty of open spots. We ended up choosing the last campsite at the end of the road. It was slightly separated from the others and partially hidden by a thick line of trees. Honestly, it was perfect. Quiet, private, peaceful. At least it felt that way at the time. We spent the next hour setting up camp. Cadence was very particular about how everything should be arranged. The tent had to face a certain direction. The cooler had to sit under the table. The lantern had to hang from a specific branch. So I mostly just followed instructions while she organized things. By the time we finished, the sky was already dark. I started a small fire while Cadence made sandwiches from the supplies we brought. For a while, everything felt exactly how we hoped it would. Just the two of us sitting by the fire, drinking cheap beer, listening to the crackling wood. No noise except the forest around us. Around 10 that night, Cadence walked over to the campground water spigot near the picnic tables to brush her teeth. I stayed by the fire, poking at the burning logs with a stick. That's when I noticed someone standing at the edge of our campsite, just outside the glow of the firelight. I hadn't heard anyone approach. One second, I was alone. The next second, there was a man standing there. He immediately raised his hand slightly in apology. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said. His name was Aiden. He explained that he was the guy camping near the blue sedan we passed earlier. He said he was doing a solo camping trip for the weekend, trying to get away from everything. The guy seemed normal enough, but something about him felt off. It might have been the way he stared. He held eye contact just a little too long. A few seconds later, Cadence walked back into the campsite, and the moment she arrived, Aiden's attention shifted completely to her. He complimented our campsite location, said it was the most secluded one in the area. He kept talking, mostly directed at Cadence. She answered politely, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. Eventually, I stepped in and told him we were planning to get some sleep soon. That seemed to get the message across. He nodded, said goodnight, and walked back toward the darkness of the trees. What I noticed, though, was that he didn't use a flashlight. He just disappeared into the woods like he could see perfectly in the dark. Cadence and I talked about it for a minute. She agreed the interaction was weird, but not necessarily threatening, just awkward. Eventually, we let it go. After another hour by the fire, we put it out and climbed into the tent. I don't remember falling asleep, but I definitely remember waking up. The first thing I noticed was the voices. Quiet, distant, but definitely human. Two people talking somewhere outside the tent. I glanced over. Cadence was still asleep beside me. My brain immediately switched into alert mode. Someone was outside our campsite at 3 in the morning. I carefully unzipped the tent and stuck my head outside. The voices stopped instantly, like whoever was talking had heard me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the campsite, empty, no people, no movement, nothing. After a minute of scanning the area, I stepped back inside the tent. It was a public campground. Maybe someone had just been walking through. That's what I told myself. Still, it took me a while to fall back asleep. The next morning, I didn't mention the voices to Cadence. I figured it wasn't worth worrying her. Instead, we spent the entire day hiking nearby trails. It actually turned out to be a great day. Fresh air, beautiful views. For a while, I almost forgot about the strange moment from the night before. Until that evening. As I walked over to grab more firewood near the truck, something caught my eye on the windshield. A folded napkin was tucked under the wiper blade. At first, I assumed it was trash that had blown in from somewhere. But when I unfolded it, I realized it was a note. 3 simple words were written across it. "You should move." I immediately showed Cadence. Her first question was exactly what I was thinking. "Do you think it's that guy, Aiden?" Honestly, who else could it be? While we were discussing it, something strange happened, almost like the universe had perfect timing. Aiden walked into our campsite again. This time, I didn't hide my irritation. I asked him if he had left the note on my truck. He looked confused for a moment, then shook his head. He said he hadn't, but then his expression changed slightly, like he was thinking about something. Finally, he said something that caught both of us off guard. He said the area had a reputation for strange activity, abandoned campsites, people's belongings found deep in the woods, other unexplained things. He said he didn't want to scare us, but he was surprised people as young as us were camping there. Then he told us something else. The night before, he heard people walking around his car. That was enough for us. Cadence was already nervous, and I wasn't exactly feeling confident either. So we decided to pack up and leave before it got completely dark. Aiden said he was planning to do the same. We worked quickly, throwing gear into the truck as fast as possible. The sun was already dropping behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the clearing. Cadence's hands were shaking while she packed. I tried to stay calm, but honestly, my nerves were starting to build too. Finally, everything was loaded. We got into the truck and started driving toward the exit road. As we passed Aiden's campsite, I noticed his blue sedan was still there. He was crouched near one of the tires. I stopped the truck and rolled down the window. "Everything okay?" I asked. He stepped back slightly. That's when I saw the tire. A huge gash ran across the rubber. It had clearly been cut on purpose. Aiden asked if we could give him a ride to the nearest town, but Cadence leaned over and quietly whispered that she didn't feel comfortable with that. So I apologized and told him I couldn't. Instead, I promised to call the police as soon as we got cell service. He nodded. We drove away. About 100 yards down the road, my headlights swept across the trees to the right. That's when I saw them. 3 figures, standing about 30 feet inside the forest. They weren't moving. They weren't hiding. They were just watching the road, watching us. My foot instinctively tapped the brake. Part of me wondered if I should go back and warn Aiden. But before I could decide, Cadence grabbed my arm and screamed, "Drive!" So I did. I pressed the gas and kept going. Neither of us spoke during the entire drive back to the highway. Once we reached cell service, I pulled over and called 911. I told the dispatcher everything, about the note, about the slashed tire, about the figures in the woods. They said they would send someone to check on the campsite. We never heard anything after that. No follow-up call, no news report, nothing. But sometimes late at night, I still think about that road and those 3 silent figures in the forest, because if they were watching us leave, then they were definitely watching Aiden stay. That moment still bothers me, because if those 3 people were watching us leave, it means Aiden was completely alone with them in the woods. What do you think actually happened to him that night? Did he escape, or did something far worse happen after we drove away? Tell me your theory in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. And if you're enjoying these chilling camping stories, make sure to subscribe, because the next story might be the most disturbing one yet. The first thing that should have warned me something was wrong was the tent. It was sitting alone in the middle of a clearing deep in the Montana wilderness. Old, moldy, half collapsed, and it smelled like something had died inside it. But the weirdest part? There were no signs that anyone had been there for years. No fire pit, no footprints, no trash, nothing. Just that tent, and a notebook full of tally marks that someone had been counting for over 8 months. What I didn't know at the time was that whoever made those marks might have still been out there, watching. This happened 2 years ago when I was 28. At the time, I was working remotely as an IT consultant out of Bozeman, Montana. The job paid well enough, but my life wasn't exactly in a great place. 3 months earlier, my wife and I had finalized our divorce. It wasn't messy. No big fight, no dramatic ending. Just one of those slow realizations that 2 people had grown apart. Still, it hit me harder than I expected. Every day felt the same. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. I felt stuck. So eventually, I decided to do something drastic. I packed up my camping gear and planned a solo trip deep into the wilderness. Just me, nature, and silence. I figured if I spent a week completely off the grid, maybe my head would clear. Looking back now, I wish I had chosen literally anywhere else. Around 2 in the morning one night, I was scrolling through old camping forums online when I found a discussion about unofficial camping spots in the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest. The thread was years old, but several people mentioned a remote clearing far beyond the usual hiking areas. No established campsites, no visitors, just untouched wilderness. It sounded exactly like what I was looking for. 2 days later, my truck was packed. I brought enough supplies for over a week. Freeze-dried meals, water filters, medical kit, extra fuel, and one more thing, my Remington hunting rifle. I'm not some gun-obsessed survivalist, but if you're camping deep in Montana wilderness, it's smart to have protection from wildlife. Bears don't care about personal growth retreats. The drive took about 4 hours. The first 3 were easy. Highway, county road, then a Forest Service road that got progressively worse the deeper I went. Eventually, my GPS completely lost track of where I was. At that point, I had to rely on the directions I had written down from the forum post. After about 20 minutes of slow crawling through overgrown trails, I finally found the narrow path someone had described. It barely looked like a road anymore. Branches scraped the sides of my truck as I pushed forward. Twice, I had to stop and move fallen limbs just to continue. Eventually, the trail narrowed so much that driving further became impossible. So I parked. From there, I carried the rest of my gear on foot. About 5 minutes into the woods, I found the clearing. It was perfect. Open space surrounded by tall pines, soft grass, clear sky overhead. But there was one thing I didn't expect. Someone else had already been there. A tent sat on the far side of the clearing. At first, I assumed another camper had discovered the same location. But as I walked closer, I realized something was off. The tent was old, really old, faded olive green fabric, the kind of tent you'd see in camping catalogs from the 1980s. The surface was covered in dark stains and patches of mold, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I called out, "Hello?" No answer, just wind moving through the trees. The zipper on the tent door was partially open. I hesitated for a moment. Then curiosity got the better of me. I slowly unzipped it the rest of the way. The smell hit me instantly. It was horrible, rotting, sour, like something had decomposed in there at some point. I actually had to turn my head and breathe through my shirt before looking inside. The tent was almost empty. There was an old sleeping bag in the corner, a few empty soup cans, and a small notebook lying near the entrance. That was it. No bones, no body, nothing that explained the smell, which honestly made it even creepier. I grabbed the notebook and stepped back into the fresh air. At first, I assumed it would contain notes, journal entries, or something useful, but when I opened it, I saw nothing but tally marks. Page after page, hundreds of them. Each group had exactly 7 marks, like someone had been counting weeks or days or something else entirely. The final page had 42 groups. I actually did the math in my head. That meant whoever made those marks had been counting something for over 8 months. But counting what? And where had they gone? Despite the strange discovery, I decided to set up my own camp anyway. I placed my tent on the opposite side of the clearing, far enough away to feel comfortable, but still close enough that I could keep an eye on the abandoned tent. Something about leaving it completely out of sight didn't feel right. That evening, I explored the surrounding area. I hiked nearly 2 miles in different directions, and what I noticed was strange. There were absolutely no signs of human activity. No fire pits, no trails, no trash, nothing. It was like no one had ever camped there before, which raised an obvious question. If that tent had been there for months, why were there no signs of anyone living there? Night came quickly. The sky was incredibly clear that evening. Without city lights, the stars looked unreal, millions of them scattered across the sky. For a while, sitting by my small fire, I actually felt peaceful. Maybe this trip was exactly what I needed. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I climbed into my tent and fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up suddenly sometime during the night. No idea what time it was, but I knew something had woken me. At first, everything was quiet. Then I heard it, whispering. 2, maybe 3 voices. Low, muffled. Somewhere outside my tent. My entire body froze. I listened carefully. The voices were maybe 20 feet away, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Just quiet murmuring back and forth. I didn't move, didn't breathe loudly, didn't make a sound. Then the voices stopped, and a few seconds later, I heard footsteps, multiple sets of them, slowly walking around my tent, circling it, like animals inspecting prey. My hand moved to the rifle beside me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I heard the zipper. Someone grabbed it and tried to pull it open. Thankfully, I'd clipped the zipper tabs together before sleeping, so it didn't move. Whoever was outside pulled harder, then stopped. For a moment, everything went silent. Then I heard something worse, scratching, like someone dragging something sharp across the tent fabric, trying to cut their way inside. That's when I snapped. I aimed the rifle at the tent entrance and shouted, "I have a gun! Back off!" Instant silence, then sudden movement, footsteps, Several sets of them running away in different directions, branches snapping, leaves crunching. Within seconds, the forest was quiet again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the rifle across my lap until sunrise. The moment daylight arrived, I stepped outside, rifle in hand. The first thing I did was look toward the abandoned tent. It was gone, completely gone. The spot where it had been was just grass, no flattened ground, no stake holes, nothing, like it had never existed. But I knew it had. I had stood there, opened it, taken the notebook. Then I noticed something else. Footprints. Dozens of them, bare human footprints forming a wide circle around my campsite. Some were small, some were large, different sizes, different directions. At least 3, maybe more people. One trail of footprints led toward a large pine tree. When I walked closer, I saw something carved into the bark. Fresh marks, tally marks, 7 groups of 7, and the beginning of another, just like the notebook. Then I noticed something hanging from a branch nearby, a dead squirrel, tied up with fishing line, dangling there like a warning or a message. That was enough for me. I ran back to my campsite and started packing immediately. My hands were shaking the entire time. Every few seconds, I looked toward the trees, half expecting someone to step out and watch me. Once everything was packed, I ran to my truck. I threw the gear in and jumped inside. My biggest fear was that my tires would be slashed. But somehow, they were untouched. Backing out of that narrow trail was one of the most stressful things I've ever done. But eventually, I made it back to the main road. I never reported what happened. Honestly, what would I even say? That people were whispering outside my tent in the middle of nowhere? That an abandoned tent disappeared overnight? That someone was still adding tally marks to a tree? But I kept the notebook, and sometimes I still look at those marks. 7 lines, over and over, page after page. And every time I do, I wonder something. If the counting was still happening that night, then what exactly were they counting? And that's the end of tonight's stories. But before you leave, I want to ask you something. Out of the 3 stories you just heard, which one disturbed you the most? Was it the mysterious tents that moved overnight, the 3 figures watching from the woods, or the abandoned tent with the tally marks deep in the wilderness? Let me know your answer down in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. And if you enjoy chilling stories like these, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because I post new horror stories every day. Until the next story, stay safe out there. You never know who or what might be watching in the dark.